With Nicole, Conversations with Nicole. Let's talk about it. Tell me all about it. I'm here. I wanna know what's on your mind. Ooh, the world needs to hear from you, and I'm so glad to have a conversation to reach the nation. And it's all about you. We'll help each other to discover innovative ways to positively change the world. Let's talk about, let's talk about, yeah. Let's talk about Conversations with Nicole.
Greetings. Welcome to Conversations with Nicole. I am Nicole Everett, your host, and this is what I call Wellness Wednesday. Wellness Wednesday is an opportunity for you, me, and my guests to have a conversation around whatever it is we decide. And today we are talking Black youth suicide, the other epidemic, the silent epidemic. And so this is a serious conversation, but one that we have been having every month. We try to cover suicide, and so I it's important. It's important. I just believe that we need to be having these types of conversations so that we can be aware and hopefully prevent death by suicide by anyone, but in particularly for our young people. And so I'm inviting you right now to invite your friends and loved ones, coworkers, everybody. Tell them they need to be on here right now. So like and share, tag someone, tell them they need to be right here, right now, because this is a very serious and much needed conversation. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, and on Roku TV via the Greater Works Network. So if you have Roku TV player or stick, you can access us by adding the Greater Works Network and watch us live. So you are in for a great conversation tonight. My guest is no stranger to Conversations with Nicole, and we are excited and delighted to have her here. But before I read a little bit of her bio and have her come on and tell us who she is, I want to hear from you. So if you will, in the comments, put in your city and state so I can give you a shout out, your city and state so I can give you a shout out. I see a couple of folks on YouTube. Cecilia Brown, not sure where you are, CC, but if you'll let us know where you are. And the Adventure Twins, very serious conversation and much needed. Yes, very much so needed. Thank you for being on here. Greetings, Chief, right here in Tallahassee, Terrell. He's joining the conversation, and we appreciate that too. So thank you so much. So, my guest is Dr. Shairi Turner, who is actually here in Tallahassee, but she has a very important job with the crisis text line. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about her in just a moment. All right, Adventure Twins in Tallahassee. I believe that's Greg now that I think about that. I see you. And then Cece is in Harrington, Delaware. Thank you for being on all the way in Delaware. So let me go ahead while other folks are chiming in and while you all are tagging people and liking and sharing. I'm going to read a little bit of Dr. Turner's bio and headshot, or bio rather. And so Dr. Shairi Turner, I love that name, is an internist and a pediatrician with an extensive background in trauma and trauma-informed practices. Currently, she is the Chief Medical Officer for the Crisis Text Line, where she leads the policy and advocacy initiatives related to mental health and crisis intervention. The Crisis Text Line is a national nonprofit organization delivering 24/7 free, high quality mental health support and crisis intervention by text. Her accolades go on and on. She has served as Chief Medical Director for the Florida Department of Juvenile Justice. She established the Office of Health Services and provided oversight of the provision of health, mental health, disability, and substance abuse services. She, from 2009 to 2011, served as the Deputy Secretary for Health and Interim State Surgeon General for the Florida Department of Health. She was a faculty consultant for the National Center for Trauma, and she currently holds a research faculty appointment at the Florida State University College of Social Work. So again, there are many more accolades, but we're gonna get right to it. So help me welcome Dr. Shairi Turner. Yay!
Yay. So good to see you again, Nicole Everett.
Good to see you too. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for
Really,
inviting me.
my pleasure. My pleasure. So tell the people who may not know who you are. I mean, I read some of your wonderful accolades and, you know, just the great and wonderful things that you've been doing in the world. But tell folks, who is Dr. Shairi Turner?
Yes. I am the mother of two Black teenagers, soon to be adults. I'm the wife of Dr. Jimmy Davis. I'm a daughter. I'm a sister-in-law, a daughter-in-law, a new auntie, and a friend, and the chief medical officer at Crisis Text Line.
Yeah.
I am someone who understands the significance of childhood trauma and the impact that that has on our mental health. I am someone who's experienced childhood trauma, and I understand the power of healing childhood trauma. I'm a suicide loss survivor, and I believe really that life is the constant and intentional journey to find our purpose. And I hope I am on that journey. I feel like I'm on that journey. And wherever it takes me between now and the end of my time on this earth, I'm with it and I'm for it.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Now, you said something that I don't think I've heard someone say, that they were a suicide loss survivor. Suicide
Yes.
loss survivor.
So a suicide loss survivor is someone who is living but has experienced the loss of someone else through suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a very close family friend die by suicide back in 1996.
Mm.
And it's an experience. It's definitely an experience that's different, obviously, than being someone who has lived experience. So
Mm.
I've not attempted suicide, but I have experienced the loss of someone else through suicide, and that's a very, very painful experience.
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. Again, I just had not heard that one before, so I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that. All right, so I see some folks on the line that I definitely got to shout out. One, Mr. Jimmy Davis, who I have known for quite some time, from the great city of Miami, from 305, and that would be Miss Shairi Turner's husband, my homeboy. So thank you for being on here, Jimmy. All right, and we got Miss Lisa on here and Latanya Smith out of Atlanta. Thank you all for being on here. Again, y'all tell some folks they need to be on here, especially those folks that either deal with youth, your coaches, your counselors, um, you know, your parents. Hey, your parents, they need to be on here because uh, Dr. Shairi is going to tell us about some of these numbers as it relates to Black youth suicide and how they have been increasing. Um, Dr. Shairi, we had Dr. Rita Walker on, who wrote the Unapologetic Guide to
Great interview.
yes, Black mental health, and she also, talked about these numbers going up. So it's really, really important that we have these conversations. So you all bring your questions, bring your comments, and let's kind of dig in. So before we do dig in, I'm gonna read my disclaimer, but I want you to tell a little bit more about the crisis text line and the important work that you all do over there.
Yes. So crisis text line, as you explained, is a 24/7 free mental health support and crisis intervention service. We are powered by very dedicated volunteers. In fact, we've trained almost 50,000 volunteers since we started in 2013. The volunteers are trained. They come from all walks of life, and they're supervised by our mental health professional staff. And anything that anyone considers a crisis, we are prepared to help. Whether it's we work with 8-year-olds, teenagers who are struggling with their homework, to people who are on the brink, literally on the brink of suicide. We help establish coping strategies, identify what the crisis is, help people find those strengths that they have within, and help to de-escalate the conversation and de-escalate the situation, in the hopes that we can take that very tense and hot moment down to a much cooler calm for the individual. But it's all by text, so it's very private. You can be anywhere and text, as opposed to telephone, where you have to find a safe space, a quiet place. You can text because everyone is texting. And about 50% of our texters are under the age of 18. So as you can imagine, we appeal to the generation that texts all the time, but we have people who text in at the age of 70 and 80. So we're here for everyone.
Wonderful. I'm glad you shared that information about, 50% of your the folks that reach out are under the age of 18. So we actually have some teachers on the line, one being my sister, who is in South Florida, and some folks that deal with college students. Mr. Anthony Jones is over at TCC here in Tallahassee. So glad to have you all on here. But you all deal with young people all the time. So I'm so glad that you're here to get this information and hopefully can pass it along to your colleagues.
And before we go on, Nicole, I do want everybody to pause and put 741-741 into your phones, so that if you ever need to text crisis text line, you can text help, you can text hello, you can text anything to 741-741. But it's important to have that in your phone right now, so you can either help someone else and have the number available, or if you're in crisis, you know where to find us.
Absolutely. So we got it scrolling on the screen, and we'll keep it up for the duration of the show. So Miss Lisa said she lost her niece a few years ago, trauma to the whole family. So Lisa, so sorry for your loss, and thank you for sharing that. I think I'm finding, at least through some of the conversations that I'm having, that there are, many people have been impacted by this death by suicide, either a family member or a friend, a colleague, and so it's heart-wrenching, heartbreaking. But again, hopefully through conversations like this, we can maybe identify some of the stressors and some of the risk factors and ways to prevent that from happening. All right, so let us read the disclaimer. All right, so all topics past, present, and future on Conversations with Nicole are for informational purposes only. They are not to be used as a diagnosis for treatment or an answer to any personal issues related to the topic being discussed before, during, or after the program. But we do want to give out this great information. So let's get started with, our topic is Black youth suicide, the other epidemic, the silent epidemic. What makes this an epidemic?
Well, formally, an epidemic is a sudden spread or occurrence of a particular undesired phenomenon. So that's a formal term. But what we're saying here is that we're seeing this sudden spread increase of Black youth suicide, where we weren't expecting that in the past really over the past 10 to 15 years. So in 1999, for 10 to 17-year-old children, suicide was the third leading cause of death across the board. It was the fifth leading cause of death for Black youth. By 2018, it was the second leading cause of death for all children 10 to 17, and the third leading cause of death for Black children. And what we found was between 2006 and 2016, there was a 70% increase in Black youth suicide for that age group. And even more shocking is the statistic that children who are between the ages of 5 and 11, Black children between the ages of 5 and 11, are 2 times excuse me, more likely to die by suicide than white children of the same age. So the fact that, yeah.
Wait. What? Say that again?
Yes. So children ages 5 to 12, that they even understand, right, what death to self is at that age, but that their suicide rates are twice that of their white counterparts. Now, the numbers are still low, but the fact that there are disparities at that age is just, it's shocking.
Yeah.
It's tragic. They're predominantly Black boys. As unfortunately as we might expect, but just at that age, and that's why it's the silent epidemic, right? Because when I speak of those rates, people don't expect to hear that. They don't think that children of that age could be contemplating or completing suicide.
Yeah, no, that is astounding. Astounding. So what are I guess the experts or people that study this, what are they saying in terms of like why they believe? I mean, we might not ever really know, but what is the school of thought in terms of why there's been this spike?
Yeah. So there is research being done, which is important. Back in as recently as 2020, Congress asked Health and Human Services to investigate this increase. And what they found was that Black children ages 10 to 17 who were dying by suicide, when compared to white children of the same age, they'd had a crisis in the past 2 weeks. Oftentimes it was related to relationship issues or family arguments or conflicts. These children had had a history of suicide attempts, as a greater history of suicide attempts, as opposed to their white counterparts who had more suicidal ideations. Interestingly, they had lower rates of known mental health problems, lower current depressed mood, lower history of ideations, and a lower past current treatment of mental health treatment. But what that really all boils down to is that these are children who have had limited access to mental health services and limited utilization of those services. So it's not necessarily that they had less need, but compared to their white counterparts, they really were not able to access, for many reasons, mental health services before this crisis occurred.
So access is a big thing, right? I would also probably guess that the knowledge that there is even some help out there, right?
Yes. So there's so many reasons, right? So the children who are at greater risk are those we would expect, right? When we talk about health disparities, same thing, social determinants of health, mental health falls within that category. So these are children who are more impoverished, come from families with lower socioeconomic status, where there's unemployment, where there's trauma in the home, where there's racism, because racialized trauma, we know, is related to depression and suicidality.
Mm.
So these are children, but again, it's broader than even this cohort, because it can affect Black children of all socioeconomic status, all levels of income and education. But when we dive into these death statistics, that's what we're finding.
Okay. Oh, okay. So racialized trauma, and we've kind of had this discussion on the show a little bit. So talk to me about what that is and looks like.
So trauma is basically your emotional response to a significant event, right?
Mhm.
So a car accident. After a car accident, if anyone's ever experienced a car accident, the next time you get into a car,
Mhm.
you are jumpier. You have an emotional response because of what's transpired, right? You're
Mhm.
worried it's going to happen again. That's a very basic definition of trauma, but
Right.
the experience can recur, can cause nightmares, can make you hypervigilant. So
Mhm.
racialized trauma just speaks to our experiences as people of color, and it's not unique to us as Black people. All BIPOC people or people of color in the United States have in some way experienced racialized trauma.
Mhm.
And what that means is the experience of being traumatized due to race, and whether that's microaggressions that occur, that may occur in the workplace or with children at school when their peers use the N-word, or peers
Mhm.
ask them if they got into school, or something happened because positive happened to them because they are a Black student.
Mhm.
Those things are microaggressions, but
Mhm.
racialized trauma can go as far as um, what we see George Floyd, right? So even just seeing the police brutality is a type of trauma. So it's
Mhm.
really trauma that we experience that's unique to us because of our race,
Mhm.
and it can have deep and lasting repercussions.
Yeah. So again, one of the contributing factors to death by suicide by this particular population. So you know, yeah, just trying to figure out how to deal and manage with all of that, right?
It's a lot.
Um, it
It's
is
a
a lot.
lot.
It is
It's
a
a
lot.
lot for parents, right?
Mhm.
And when you look at it in the context of this pandemic, right? So
Okay.
over the past 2 years, we were, hit by this disease that was unexpected,
Yeah.
um, just unnatural. We suffered significant loss,
Mm.
significant grief. We watched as we, as Black people, were disproportionately impacted. So the
Mm.
pandemic was and is a trauma in and of itself,
Right.
right? Because we've lost so many family members, friends to the pandemic. We don't know when it's going to end. We just keep seeing these peaks and recessions. It creates fear. It creates
Mhm.
uncertainty, right? Parents are teachers now. Parents are homeschooling. Parents are struggling. Parents have lost their jobs,
Right.
or they're out as first, essential workers, not able
Mhm.
to take care of their kids at home. So it's created a huge stress for parents, right? And then you have children. When you think, if children start thinking of or the memories that we have may go back as far as the age of 5. So
Mhm.
if a child is 12 now, so 5 to 12 gives you 7 years of experiences. If you take 2 of those years and wrap them into the pandemic, that's a far larger percentage of their life than for us as an adult. So 2 years for us, given our age, is not as significant as children who are continuing to develop, continuing to learn about interactions, further their social skills, have brain development. These are significant and important years for them.
They are. That's this age that you're mentioning. That's where core values and beliefs and morals and things. This is the age that those are built.
Social interactions. How do we interact with each other if it's only via Zoom?
Absolutely. So I got a few folks that I want to just acknowledge. Miss Princess, thanks for being here. And Eric, thank you for being here as well. But Miss Deborah Lloyd is saying something that I think it bears repeating. She said, having the conversation about suicide is a good beginning. Dispel old myths that Black folks don't complete suicide, or I think she meant commit suicide, maybe, particularly for our Black boys.
Right.
And so, I've had folks on before, and that comment has come up about black people not committing suicide. I know when I was coming up, if you heard of anything like that, it was always associated with someone that was white. You never heard of a Black person committing suicide.
And that was true back then. The statistics, because that was what I understood as I was growing up as well, because those statistics were true, which is why we're saying this is a silent epidemic.
Right.
Because people are still holding on to that notion that Black people don't die by suicide. They don't take their own life. And that's just not the case. So every opportunity that I have to talk to anyone, particularly people of color, about these statistics, it's to raise that awareness, right? And one of the things we didn't do, in addition to your caveat to start, is to say that this conversation could be triggering for people, and that it's okay if you need to leave the conversation, because sometimes it's hard to hear about suicide, but it's important to talk about. And it's also important to understand what's happening. So when they look at the data around children who have died by suicide, and we try not to say commit suicide, because that goes back to when suicide, it was a crime, right? So when children die by suicide between the ages of in the earlier age group, it's by suffocation, which is hanging, or some other type of suffocation. Both boys and girls at those younger ages, like 10 to 14, the rates are really equal around suffocation. But then when you get to the age of 15 to 17, boys tend to use firearms more than girls. Girls are still engaging in some type of suffocation, whether it's hanging or such. But and again, it's hard. Like, we're starting to see that this data is underestimating, because oftentimes what we're now seeing as suicides were classified as accidental injuries, when in fact, when you understand the concept that a child at that younger age could have taken their own life, there's a reassessment around the circumstances related to death. But there's a difference between girls and boys when you get into those older teen years, where access to firearms, right? There's, taking pills, making attempts like that. There's an opportunity sometimes to save someone who's ingested through poisoning. But with firearms, it's really, almost immediate and certain.
Right. Yeah, I've heard of one of the interventions is like removing certain things that could be used as weapons, or you know, pills, or making sure that those are either locked up or out of the reach of children. And so, again, these are kind of the type of interventions that we want to be mindful of.
Yes. Yes, because at this, at the younger ages, you are, more impulsive, right?
Mhm.
So brain development goes from in utero to the age of 25. And one of the things we know is that teenagers are impulsive, right?
Mm,
Like a thought
mhm.
gets into their head, and if something is available and accessible, like a gun or a firearm,
Mhm. Mhm.
it will be used. Whereas if there's, not a means to
Right.
to complete a suicide, then there's at least the opportunity for that moment to pass, and
Mhm.
perhaps for someone to help the child or the
Yeah.
teenager.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So again, something else to think about. Like you said, that development goes on to age 25.
Five. Now we
Yeah.
know, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So that impulsive behavior. So again, something else that we need to think about. We might think of our young person that's age 18, and by law, yes, they are a legal adult, but they're still in a developmental stage.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
Thoughts, actions, they're still, um, the filter that we have as an adult to say, like, all right, is there a resource? Is there something I can do to help myself? May not be there for
Right.
kids, for
Right.
children at that
Right.
age.
Right. Yeah. So that kind of brings up a topic that you and I have kind of talked about, and that is when your child is saying that they want to hurt themselves or that they don't want to be here anymore, or they can say a number of things along those lines. And maybe parents don't really take that serious. And so what's your advice or thoughts around if their child or a young person, and this could be for a counselor or a teacher or anybody that comes in contact with young people that is talking in this manner, what what,
Yeah.
what would you say to them?
Take them seriously. Take them seriously. It's far more rare for a child to be joking about this than to be serious. Like, if a child that you know is talking about self-harm or death or feelings of death or wanting to die, take it seriously. It is an urgent, emergent situation. It means, what do you do with that information, right? Because a lot of parents are struck by that. Um, what that means is you reach out to, if you have a counselor or a social worker that you know or that the child is seeing, or if you reach out to the pediatrician, you have to get that child screened and evaluated to see how imminent those thoughts are, because parents oftentimes are surprised. They say, I had no idea, or I just didn't believe that it was possible that my child was saying this, or I didn't know what to do. Oftentimes, there's a stigma, right? So feeling like
Mhm.
my child's not crazy, and I'm not going to let anybody outside of our home think that my child is crazy. So I'm not going to necessarily get the resources that they may need. Um, but many times, children keep this themselves. So opening up and normalizing a conversation about mental health in your home can be critical, because and key, because if kids know that when they are not feeling well, or they're feeling sad, or like they want to hurt themselves, and you've had conversations in the home
Mhm.
about mental health and mental well-being and what to do and what resources are, then it opens the space for kids to come and say that. But when they do, it's imperative to believe them.
Yes. All right. So you all heard it from Dr. Turner herself. You gotta take them serious, and it may, as uncomfortable as it may be, and that don't allow what would be perceived as shame or guilt or anything get in the way of that. So you know they need to be able to come to you and tell you what's going on with them. they need to.
And the other thing I would add is, people are looking for depressive signs and symptoms, right? Sadness, isolation. But we also know that depression and loneliness can be masked as anger
Mm-hmm.
or ADHD, right? Hyperactivity. So it's not necessarily going to be very classic symptoms. So you have to stay tuned in with your kids. You have to have the conversation, be willing to listen, right? Be willing to hear it. However they describe their moods, their emotions. It's hard. These past 2.5 years have been so hard on children. We won't even know the impact developmentally on children that have, once we get through this pandemic, what it will have done, impacted. But we already know that it's impacted their mental health since prior to the pandemic, and now we've seen worsening mental health.
Absolutely. So we got a couple comments. Princess said, "I do because I know the effects of suicide and grew up around a lot of child institutionalized who just wanted to die. I guess since I had this experience, it's not surprising because I know and I live it." But Deborah also had a question. She said, "For peers, if a friend is talking about suicide, what can they do?"
Right. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to have that conversation.
Mhm.
You don't have to be a therapist if someone says to you they're thinking about suicide, because when they're in that space, it's a very deep, dark, and lonely place to be. And oftentimes, people who've survived suicide attempts will say that, if someone had just noticed or had just said something to me so I didn't feel so alone. So if you have a friend who is expressing depression or loneliness or sadness or thoughts of suicide, be with them, right? Be with them and ask them what would be most helpful. It could be finding crisis intervention services with them, right? So let's sit here and text crisis text line. Let's sit here and let me call your therapist, right? Let me get you emergency services. So that they, you feel there's sometimes a paralysis that comes with the sadness and the darkness prior to a suicide attempt. And if someone is experiencing that, just being there and taking action with them, you do not need to be a therapist. You can be that ally with them to help them to get the service that they need. And on the other side, if you notice someone is struggling and they don't have the words to tell you, it's okay to ask people if they're not doing well, if they're thinking about hurting themselves, because it's easier to just kind of have that relief and say, yes, and I need help, than to be sitting at coffee and try to figure out how to bring up, like, I've had thoughts of hurting myself. I've had thoughts of dying, right? That's a tough thing to bring up in a conversation with your friends or family sometimes. But if you notice someone is not themselves, take the time, sit there and listen, ask the questions.
Yeah. Thank you for that. No, that's sometimes the gift of presence can be, just very important and invaluable. So Terrell said that what are some non-classic signs that a child may be battling mental health issues that parents can look for? We lost my nephew in July 2016 to suicide at the age of 17, and by all accounts, he was a loving and happy kid that was entering his senior year of high school. The trauma it caused for my brother, his wife, and their kids shifted their family dynamics forever. It's a wound that doesn't seem to heal. So non-classic
Yeah.
signs that a child may be battling mental health issues.
First of all, I'm very sorry for your
Yeah.
family's loss. It's devastating. I can only imagine it's devastating to lose a child, whether it's your own child, a family member, and know that sometimes the precursors, the signs aren't always there, right? So some non-typical, signs that you can look for are changes in behavior patterns. So are they sleeping more, sleeping less, more irritable, more argumentative, giving things away, interacting less with friends, right? So giving up their friendship circles and starting to isolate. But I have to say, there's instances where they look back and it's very challenging to see what the triggers were. But if we can get ahead of it with children who may have some early mental health symptoms, that's one place to start. But sometimes the loss is huge because the child does present as well and having a normal affect, but that too, I would say, as we learn more and understand more about childhood trauma, knowing that, so when I speak about childhood trauma, there's several domains. So there's family dysfunction. So is there a parent who's mentally ill, a parent who's been incarcerated? Did the child experience physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect? Is there spousal abuse in the home? So those are all risk factors. Is there community violence, right? Is this a child who's experienced bullying, racialized trauma? So the list is long, but those are some things that the child might not even be able to articulate, but that have been within their sort of have been in their environment that then affects their mood, their behavior, their mental health.
Good points. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so Terrell, it's no kind of simple, easy answer to that, because of course there are a number of things that could be going on, and you just don't know how they're processing that. So I think continuing to have conversations with them to try to understand what their experiences have been or are, and then what their thoughts and feelings are about those experiences, because I think those are some pretty good indicators, or at
And
least give some clues.
Yeah. And I would also add that if a child has experienced any of those things, we really, as a people, have to destigmatize therapy and going to therapists. Sometimes it's an access issue, right? So you want to find a therapist of color, but sometimes it's a lack of trust in mental health providers, just given our experience in the past. But it's important that we start to have the conversation about finding a mental health provider. Especially if your child has experienced any of those traumas, because otherwise they've internalized it and they may appear to be fine on the surface, but something may have happened and they just may not feel comfortable talking to a parent, a teacher, a friend. But there's a space and a safe space that a therapist can provide for that child to start to explore and excavate some of those feelings and experiences.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that as well. I've had quite a few clinicians on that have expressed some of the very things that you have said just now. So thank you for that. All right, so we have quite a few more comments and questions. So Isis, who is a clinician out of Arkansas, she's been on the show. She said, what alternatives do you see when clients express SI, which I believe is suicide ideations, to calling authorities for wellness checks and ER? Many are afraid to speak up because they don't want to do inpatient care.
Right. That's a great question, Isis. It's actually a good segue to talk about 988,
Okay.
which is has been legislated and funded as the short code for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So people know the National Suicide Hotline. 988 is now going in, as of July, will be the short code for dialing for telephone, text, and chat, that will ideally, when the whole infrastructure kind of develops around it, will provide that alternative to calling 911, right? To calling an ER, to calling, to taking them to the ER. And depending on the community, again, because communities have different resources invested in mental health, you can text 988. Actually, crisis text line is looking to support 988 in some capacity. So instead of calling 911, you can call 988, you can text 988, you can chat to 988. So that gives other options and accessibility so that people are not calling law enforcement immediately. Text to 988, calling 988 ideally will create an infrastructure for crisis intervention and support that is very different than what we've seen in this country before. And I'd like to also take the moment to say, like, the fact that we have that legislation, the fact that President Biden spoke in his State of the Union about the need for mental health support, the resources that were going to go into supporting this mental health crisis. The fact that the Congressional Black Caucus wrote a report called Ring the Alarm, The Crisis of Black Suicide in America. I have the honor of sitting on with Representative Watson Coleman out of New Jersey and the Black Mental Health Brain Trust. The U.S. Surgeon General had an advisory, Dr. Vivek Murthy, protecting youth mental health. So what this is saying is it's not just attention locally, it's that the situation is an epidemic and we're attempting to address it at all levels, but as high up as the president and our representatives, congresspeople are focused on this need for support for Americans who are in crisis, in mental health crisis.
And that's quite commendable. But I will also say it's about time. Yeah. It's about time.
It's really beyond time. I mean, that's why this is a crisis, because we have not had insurance support. We have not had the conversations. We have not started to address prevention in the schools, right? Where we saw how effective sexual education prevention in the middle schools and high schools was. It's time to now have that same level of prevention and discussion for middle school and high school students.
Yeah, for sure. So Tracy Adams Golay, who is here in Tallahassee, said this topic is crucial at this time. The children have encountered unfathomable situations in the past few years. Adults have difficulties imagine what children are going through. Pay attention to everything.
Absolutely, Tracy.
Yeah. So we got Corey Simon on, and he said, how much can we point to social media and technology for the uptick in the numbers? Good question.
That's a great question. I don't have the direct correlation numbers, but we do know that particularly for girls, social media. So there's two elements to social media. There's the constant inundation of what is negative in the world that we're seeing on social media, the shootings, the police brutality. It's for children's brains, it's like they see it again and again and again. It just gets embedded for them, right? And then that affects mood and thought and sleep, right? So as parents, as best you can, limit those negative, loops of constant exposure to what's going on in the world, those news cycles of negativity. Then the other side of that is the impact of, social media imagery, right? So we know that some of the applications are now being correlated to, especially for girls, right? Body image, eating disorders, right? Because people will post, especially celebrities, will touch up and post, like everybody else in the world is living their best life except you, right? And that's not the case. But when kids are scrolling through and seeing all the vacations and the parties that they're not a part of, it creates this sense like, what's wrong with me? Why am I alone? Right. And then there's this feeling of like, I need to create a post that shows how happy I am, whether I am or not. So the data is already out there that's supporting and showing that social media is having an impact on our kids' mental health. And we're also going to, the jury is out, but as we're entering the metaverse, that too will be studied as, insofar as its effects on mental health and well-being of children.
Yeah, so I'm torn on this one because it's like, we didn't have all of this stuff when we were coming up and we were okay, and so I know we get caught up into the comparisons of, what I don't have in comparison to what other people have. Yeah, I don't
We
know.
gotta have conversations with our children. Like
We do.
the difference for us as adults, when we were children, our parents were the source of information, right? They
Mhm.
gave us a lot of the information that we had because otherwise it was like newspapers or just kind of the evening news. So we looked to them for information. Our children are not looking to us for information. They
Mhm.
are getting all the information and more that they need or don't need from every outlet possible, right? They can get whatever they want, whether it's YouTube, anything they think of, they can reach out and find it on the internet. So what we as parents have to do is sit and curate that information and put it in perspective so that they know, you're seeing, your friends at these parties and all this, or you're seeing these celebrities, but like
Right.
in reality, this is what's happening. They are not as different from you as you think.
I like how you said that. Curate this information, right? Because on the
You have to
surface,
explain.
you do. It does look like they're living their best lives, but there's some other things that are going on that is not being put out, in is not being posted or talked about. So you got to put all of that into perspective,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And as parents, we have to limit, like teach your kids, like you can do it, several ways. There's enough apps that are out there. Um,
We got Dr. Fowler on with
we
us
got
today.
Dr.
Hey,
Fowler.
Dr. Ken. The issues presented to children today are far more frequent and traumatic than our
Yeah,
childhood.
right. Absolutely. It's like
Mhm.
the repetition
Mhm.
that comes from the news cycles when children's brains are growing and developing. It's like it's embedding, and it also makes us all believe, not even just children, that
There's something wrong with us. We're inadequate.
also that the sky is falling,
Mm.
right? Where everything you see is negative, it creates a much more catastrophized view of the world, right? Like
Mhm.
we're watching the war again and images and then shooting in Brooklyn, right? So for kids who have
Right.
limited perspective, right? Sitting
Mm.
here in Tallahassee, limited perspective, the rest of the world is just a catastrophe.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
don't, the news cycles just cycle the negative. We don't get the positive, the uplift.
Yeah.
Or if we do, we have to go seeking it.
For sure, for sure, for sure. So, we got a couple more comments that I wanted to bring up. Miss T said, "I definitely agree with children going to counseling. I certainly would have benefited from it as a child. It is definitely something that we need to work with parents to buy into this idea." And then Lakeisha, she's just joining us, but She said, I'd love to hear your tips on the conversations we should be having with our children under the age of 10, as we aren't seeing these prevention programs in schools, especially in elementary school.
That's right. So
Mhm.
first it's important to understand it yourself, right?
Mhm.
And get comfortable with having a conversation with your child. So as your child gets older, we as parents have to learn how to have those difficult conversations. So in the same way, we kind of have to wrap our minds around having a conversation about sex so our
Mhm.
kids understand and are prepared before they get to it. This is the same thing, right? So everybody knows, at a given age, children, vary in their understanding, right? So follow their lead somewhat. So if they're asking questions and they have an awareness of what's going on, or they see a suicide on, because we've had some very prominent young Black people die by suicide. So Regina King's son, Chesley Chris, Miss USA. So depending, you have to know your child. For all of this, you have to know your child. So if your child is picking this up, asking questions, reading about it, ask them what they understand. Ask them what they're thinking about it, so you can get a sense of how they are processing that information. And then if you feel like they're ready, start to talk about it. Like, people can feel happy, appear happy. Like, this is an important conversation. People can appear happy when they're not,
Mhm.
right? And they can post to be happy, post and look very happy when they're not. So you can start there, right? And exploring, um, you know, talking about times when how do you handle as a child under the age of 10, right? You talk to your children about how do they handle when they're unhappy at school, right? Ask them if they feel comfortable coming to you and talking to you when things aren't right, or don't or if they're upset. And if they don't feel comfortable talking to you, help them to figure out who's an adult that you would talk to if something happened to you at school, or you were sad or very angry, right? Because really it's like it's opening that communication dialogue, both to hear kind of what are they internalizing, and to also let them know that you or some other adult is available to hear whatever it is they have to say, the good, the bad, the ugly. And then you're kind of prepared, and they know that you're available for, if they start to have um, feelings of self-harm or of sadness. And the other thing that we can do as parents is model that and talk about our own sadness and our own feelings, watching the war, or watching the negative things that we see in the news. Like, that makes me feel sad. How does it make you feel? And this is how what I do to deal with that sadness. I turn off the TV. I try to find something that I enjoy doing that makes me feel good. So there's a lot of ways to approach it depending on your child's developmental age. But the most important thing I would say is letting your child know that you're there to listen without judgment, right? You don't have to solve everything, but you're actually there to listen and hear.
Very well said. Very well said. So we have quite a few other comments. Dr. Fowler he says, awesome discussion. I'm going to go to Dr. Paula Lewis, who is a child psychologist. And so she is a school district administrator in, I believe, Brevard County, if I'm not mistaken. She said, I see issues with police agencies refusing to transport students in crisis. This is a barrier. We have conducted a risk assessment indicating the student is at serious risk, and we are at a pause with the refusal to transport. I have called in wellness checks when parents refuse to transport their students to a crisis stabilization unit as well. The stigma of mental health still continues to interfere with students getting the help that they need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
I wish that's like, there's such a large systemic issue there. Like there's a racial issue there, and then there's a systemic issue there, where again where law enforcement and mental health converge, and the students are the ones who are at that point of convergence that's so risky for them. um to my mind, it means backing up, right, and starting to have the conversations where you can at the school district level, right, bringing statistics
Mm-hmm.
and talking about our community. What are the statistics in our community around trauma and suicide, and what are the risk factors that we have that we need to address, and getting folks at the table. And that, easier said than done, of course, but it's a system-wide issue, and we just have to continue to push the conversations.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we're right at our 1 hour mark, but we do have some more questions. So if you could just give us a little bit more of your
Yes,
time, Dr. Cole.
yes.
Okay, good, good, good,
Thank you.
good.
Oh my
So
goodness.
for those of you who are new to this platform, I invite you to subscribe to the Conversations with Nicole YouTube channel, like, share, comment, and tag someone, because again, this is really great information that Dr. Turner is sharing with us tonight. So I'm going to draw our attention to Terrell's question. He wants to know, what are some tools parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and mentors can use to start normalizing the conversation and create safe spaces for you to talk about mental health challenges they may be dealing with, minimizing their feelings. So I think you've kind of addressed some of it, in terms of like when they see these negative things, asking them how they feel, you expressing how you feel when you see them. So again, as you stated, that term that I like now is, we'll have to use that, is curating, curating that conversation. So, what additional things can be provided,
Yeah.
or what additional suggestions might you have regarding to his question?
So there's actually a lot of toolkits and resources out there.
Mhm,
Um, for us at Crisis Text Line, we do a mental health toolkit for parents and teachers and administrators.
mhm,
Um, the NAMI is an organization. NAMI is a national. NAMI is a national organization.
mhm.
Um, AFSP, the American Federation for Suicide Prevention. Um, so depending on what you're looking for, there actually are a lot of websites and resources available, both where you can find local and national supports. But I would go back to being able to have those conversations with your kids, or even talking to school counselors about what resources are available in your community,
Mhm.
talking to your pediatrician. Pediatricians are there's a movement now for pediatricians to start screening children for suicide so that they catch it. We have to catch it where we can. And
Mhm.
it's really only screening is one of those earlier, sort of further up before we get to crisis situations. Having schools screen or having pediatricians' offices screen is an opportunity to catch a child who might otherwise be speaking about or talking about suicidal ideations. But I would suggest NAMI, AFSP, some of the other organizations, and maybe Nicole, we can put
Together a list. Yeah.
is yes
Mhm.
to put on the website or on the Instagram, so that you all can have those resources.
Mhm.
It's
Absolutely.
not right at your fingertips, but it's also not as far away as you may think.
Right.
American Academy of Pediatrics, like
Mhm.
people are talking about this and they're trying to put the resources out for the communities, but there is some digging you have to do to get to know where to go.
Yeah. No, good stuff.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
we'll put
Cecilia.
together a list and we'll definitely get it out to the viewers. So I know you did an op-ed, right?
Yes.
Speaking about the need for mental
Prevention.
health, right, to be taught in school as early as middle school,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you want to share a little bit about,
Well, yeah. I mean, so when we started talking about the age, right? 5 to 12. We're losing children to suicide, 5 to 12, 10 to 17. So middle school is that age where they certainly have an understanding about their own mental health and well-being, whether they articulate it as such. They do understand good days, bad days. They understand, to some degree, mental illness, right? Children are aware, right? There's enough out there for them to be aware. So when we look at the continuum of behavioral health care, it really starts with health promotion, so mental health promotion. So putting out there, how do we establish positive, good health and mental well-being? And then it gets into that prevention space. So in the middle schools, having conversations about how do you support a peer, or how do you recognize symptoms of depression amongst yourself or your family members. It's an opportunity to have a dialogue with children who are either have had no experience with mental illness,
Mhm.
or those who have had, a very intense, up close and personal experience with mental health and mental illness. You just never know. And they're all, throughout the classroom, you will have the spectrum.
Mhm.
So when we teach children, when we teach teenagers, we've seen success, like I said, around prevention through sex education. It's the same thing. It's how do we arm our children with the tools that they need for today, right? Let's prepare the teachers to have the conversations, because they're not easy ones to have. So let's start there with our teachers and our administrators,
Yeah.
so that they feel prepared, because we can't just tell them to start instituting prevention discussions about suicide in the classroom without preparing them, without really having a sense of, we've got teachers with lived experience. We have teachers who are suicide survivors. Like, that's a whole other conversation.
That is.
But let's arm them with the tools that they need, so that A, they can recognize when children are struggling, and B, they can have the conversation across the board for all the kids. And then what do you do when you identify children who are at risk? What are the next steps after that?
Mhm. Indeed, indeed, indeed. All right. Let's see. We got Doris Henry says, "What do you offer the parents, teachers, and administrators to address the violent, aggressive video games that the children are addicted to and the trauma they trigger?"
Hello, Doris Henry, my mother-in-law.
Oh, hey, Mom.
So what do we offer? Can you pop the question up
Oh,
again?
what
Uh,
do you offer
Parents,
the
teachers.
parents?
Yeah.
To address the violent, aggressive video games that children are addicted to and the trauma they trigger. So I will mention this. This is a new term that I did not know, but Dr. Rita Walker, who was on Monday, she talked about ruminate,
Ruminate.
ruminate,
Ruminate.
ruminate, which is something playing over and over and
Repeated
over.
thoughts.
Right. And
Right.
so I told her I call that it's like the broken record, because it just keeps playing over and over and over again. And so, you know, having a break in that
Mhm.
causes us to not be so focused and concentrate on it. But
Mhm.
I'll let you. But I just wanted to share that new SAT vocabulary word that we learned.
Ruminate. Ruminate.
Right.
So, as a resource, the Family Online Safety Institute
Hmm.
is a great organization that addresses online safety and provides resources for families. as well as, teachers and administrators. But to your point, it's almost like a desensitization through the repeated violence that children are participating in as the players of these video games, where shooting is commonplace, where killing people becomes, not a thing, right? It's not a thing because it's part of the game. So it devalues life in a certain way where you can repeat it. And then again, so to the point of ruminating, right? You think about it over and over again. What do? We try to limit. You've got to, as parents, as teachers, we've got to talk about what the impacts are and limit the exposure. But again, Family Online Safety Institute is a great resource for folks to go to when they're looking for ways of addressing with their children just what they can access via, when they go online.
Yeah. Okay. So that's going on the resource list.
Good.
That's going on the resource list. All right. Well, I think we have talked about all of at least the bullets that were on my list. Was there anything else that you wanted to say in closing?
I would just say, let's stay alert. Let's stay aware. Let's talk to our children. Let's have the difficult conversations. They're not always comfortable, but let your children know that you're listening, that you're available, and do listen, right? You don't have to solve. Sometimes it's just about hearing the situation out, and you get a lot of insight in just exploring what's going on in the day and sitting and taking a listening posture. But that being said, again, I can't reiterate enough, take your child seriously. If they're talking about self-harm, if they're talking about, rumination, thinking about negative things or thinking about hurting themselves, take it seriously, find help, call your pediatrician, call the school counselor. Don't sit with that information. You do not have to sit with that information alone. There's resources, and the other resources we'll put in will include some ways to find Black therapists.
Yes.
So that we can, because we know sometimes it's easier talking to someone who's had a shared experience where you don't have to get over the hurdle of explaining. But we do have some good resources to help folks find Black therapists, and please do that for your children. Find a way to have that conversation. Because they need it. The statistics are showing that they need us to be there despite our own, distress with the pandemic. It's a deeper issue than that.
Yes. Thank you so much. So we're getting some feedback from the folks. If this was beneficial to you, if you learned some things, or at least it was reinforced some things that you already knew, but maybe you forgot, so reminded, just give us a thumbs up or a heart or something in the comment. Let us know.
And I would add, just to on a positive note, Corey Simon asked a question. He's part of Volunteer Florida. He's the CEO of Volunteer Florida, and
I did not know
we're
that.
doing a Healthy Minds youth symposium,
Ooh.
right? With student ambassadors. So there is a way to work with our children, with our youth, so that they can both advocate for others, help others, and learn themselves. So we'll be in Orlando next week. So I think it's there's hope. There's pockets. We're making progress. We're making progress, but we have to be intentional about it.
Indeed, we do. So let's keep this conversation going, people. Let's keep it going. Many of you are chiming in that it's an important conversation, and you appreciate, us having it. So, let's keep it going. So again, like, share, tag a friend, and let them know that there is help. There are some tools that they can use to help their youth and loved ones. And you're not alone. You're not alone. You know, there are many people that are seeking to help eliminate the stigma and save lives. I mean, literally save lives. So, yeah. All right. Wow.
Thank you,
So,
everyone.
yes, yes, I'm loving it. I'm loving it. Everybody's really chiming in here, so we really appreciate that. I do again. I got to give a plug to. You see the crisis text line. If you know someone in crisis, they can text help to 741-741, and there'll be somebody there. They're there 24/7, 365.
Yes,
As
you got it.
yeah, as Dr. Turner has mentioned. Also, again, Conversations with Nicole. I would appreciate your support by subscribing to the YouTube channel, checking out the videos. I tell folks to treat it as a podcast because we're just having a conversation, but hopefully you benefit from some of the things that we talk about. And check us out on Roku. If you have a Roku TV player or stick, Greater Works Network, you can add us as an option, and you don't have to come on YouTube or Facebook. You just turn on your TV, and we're right there, live 8:30 on Mondays and Wednesdays. Next week, we actually will be talking about Blacks in the military and some of the things that they have to combat, pun intended, with being Black in the military. And we also will be talking about autism because April is Autism Awareness Month. And, you know, I had questions just like with Black people dying by suicide. Do Black people get autism? You know,
Yes,
before Holly Robinson P, I had not heard of Black people with autism. So, you know, clearly that is
it is
something that
real.
it is real,
It
right?
is
It
real.
is real. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I just want to give a shout out to you, Nicole Everett, for continuing to elevate these difficult but important topics again and again and again, because we shine light on it. We normalize you through the work that you do, normalize these conversations. And every time that somebody else hears them, understands, it's another opportunity to save a life. So I thank you
Yeah.
for your conversations, your very important conversations.
Thank you. My pleasure. This is truly a labor of love, and I enjoy having these talks with great people like you as well as the guests. So I, you know, it's this is truly a labor of love, and I'm grateful to be working in this space. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, you all have a great rest of the evening, and we will see y'all real soon. Have a good night. Bye.